In the suffocating darkness of the beast's belly, surrounded by the stench of decay and the rhythmic pulse of living walls pressing against him, Jonah finally understood there was nowhere left to run. But let me tell you how he got there. This story begins not in the depths of the sea, but in a quiet moment when God's voice broke through the ordinary day and called to Jonah with a command that would change everything. "Go to Nineveh," God said, "that great city, vast and wicked, where cruelty had become currency and violence flowed through the streets like water. Go there and cry out against their wickedness, for I have seen what they have done." Now Jonah was a prophet, a man who had heard God's voice before, but this time something inside him recoiled. Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, the empire that had brought such suffering to his people. These weren't lost sheep needing guidance. These were wolves who had torn apart nations. Why should he be the instrument of their possible redemption? Why should they receive even the chance of mercy? So Jonah made a decision that would seem almost comical if it weren't so tragic. He would run. Not just away from Nineveh, but away from God himself, as if the creator of heaven and earth could be escaped by putting enough distance between them. He rose and fled toward Tarshish in the completely opposite direction, as far west as a man could go when God had told him to go east. He went down to Joppa, the ancient port city where the Mediterranean stretched out like a shimmering promise of escape. There he found a ship bound for Tarshish, paid the fare, and descended into the vessel, no doubt feeling that peculiar mix of relief and guilt that comes from deliberate disobedience. As the ship pulled away from shore and the land became a thin line on the horizon, perhaps Jonah allowed himself to believe he had succeeded. But God was not so easily avoided. The Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a storm rose up that the ship threatened to break apart. These were experienced sailors, men who had weathered countless tempests, and even they were terrified. The waves rose like mountains, crashing over the deck, and the ship pitched and groaned as if it were a living thing in agony. Each man cried out to his own God, and they began throwing cargo overboard, anything to lighten the ship, anything to survive. And where was Jonah during all this chaos? He had gone down into the inner part of the ship, laid down, and fallen into a deep sleep. Can you imagine it? The prophet of God, running from his calling, sleeping through divine judgment. The captain found him there and shook him awake. "How can you sleep?" he shouted over the roar of the storm. "Get up and call upon your God. Perhaps he will give us a thought so that we do not perish." The sailors decided to cast lots to discover who had brought this calamity upon them, and the lot fell on Jonah. They surrounded him with questions tumbling over each other. "What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? Who are your people?" And Jonah, perhaps with a weariness that comes from finally facing the truth, told them everything. "I am a Hebrew," he said, "and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then he confessed what he had done, how he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord. The men were terrified, truly afraid now, because they understood they were caught in something far beyond a natural storm. "What have you done?" they asked. The sea grew wilder with each passing moment, waves like the hands of an angry God reaching for the ship. "What shall we do to you?" they pleaded, "that the sea may quiet down for us?" Jonah's answer came with a strange calm. "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea, then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." But here's something remarkable about these pagan sailors. They didn't want to do it. They rowed hard, trying desperately to bring the ship back to land, refusing to throw a man to his death even though he had confessed his guilt and told them it was the only way. Only when it became clear that they would all perish did they finally cry out to Jonah's God, begging not to be held accountable for innocent blood, acknowledging they were acting out of necessity, not choice. Then they picked Jonah up and threw him into the raging sea, and immediately, As if a switch had been thrown, the sea ceased from its raging, the wind died, the waves calmed. The sailors stood on the deck in the sudden stillness, water dripping from their clothes, and they feared the Lord with a fear that was no longer terror, but awe. They offered sacrifices and made vows right there on the ship. But Jonah was sinking into the deep. He felt the cold water close over his head, felt the currents pulling him down into darkness. The waters closed in over him, the deep surrounded him, weeds wrapped around his head. He sank down to the very roots of the mountains, to the foundations of the earth. The bars of the earth closed around him forever, or so it seemed. And then, in that moment of utter desperation, God appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. Into the belly of the beast he went, sliding down into that wet, dark prison. And there, in the fish's belly, Jonah remained for 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days, 72 hours in absolute darkness, in the gurgling, churning stomach of a sea creature, not knowing if he would ever see light again. And in that darkness, Jonah finally stopped running. He prayed. He prayed with a desperation and honesty that perhaps had been missing from his prayers before. He acknowledged that God had cast him into the deep, into the heart of the seas, that the waters had engulfed him, that all God's waves and breakers had swept over him. He thought he had been banished from God's sight, yet he vowed he would look again toward God's holy temple. His prayer became almost poetic in its intensity, describing how he had descended to the roots of the mountains, how the earth had imprisoned him forever, yet the Lord had brought his life up from the pit. When his life was ebbing away, he remembered the Lord, and his prayer came to God in his holy temple. He declared that those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs, but he would sacrifice to God with songs of thanksgiving and fulfill his vows. Salvation, he proclaimed, comes from the Lord. And then the Lord spoke to the fish, and the fish vomited Jonah out onto dry land. Can you picture it? The great creature heaving and convulsing, expelling this waterlogged prophet onto a beach somewhere, leaving him gasping and grateful on solid ground, alive when he should have been dead, given a second chance when he deserved none. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. And this time, Jonah went. He arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. It was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth, a metropolis of perhaps 600,000 people. Jonah began his journey into the city, walking for a day, and then he cried out with a message as stark and simple as a funeral bell. Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. That was it. No elaborate sermon, no detailed explanation, just a proclamation of coming judgment. And something extraordinary happened. The people of Nineveh believed God. From the greatest to the least, they proclaimed a fast and put on sackcloth. When word reached the king, he rose from his throne, removed his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. He issued a decree that every person and every animal should fast and be covered with sackcloth, that everyone should call urgently on God and turn from their evil ways and violence. Who knows? The king said, God may yet relent and turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. And God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil ways, and he relented from the disaster he had said he would bring upon them. He did not do it. But this displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he became angry. This was exactly what he had feared would happen, exactly why he had run in the first place. He prayed to God with bitter honesty. Is this not what I said when I was still in my country? This is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. God's response was gentle, almost amused. Do you do well to be angry? Jonah went out of the city and made a booth for himself, sitting in its shade to see what would become of the city, perhaps still hoping for judgment to fall. And God appointed a plant, a leafy vine, that grew up over Jonah to give shade for his head and save him from his discomfort. Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. For a moment, he was happy. But the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. Again he asked that he might die. "It is better for me to die than to live," he said. And God asked Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry for the plant?" Jonah answered, "Yes, I do well to be angry. Angry enough." Then came God's final lesson, delivered with the patience of a father teaching a stubborn child. "You pity the plant," God said, "for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?" There the story ends, with a question hanging in the air, unanswered. Did Jonah finally understand? Did he grasp that God's mercy was bigger than his anger? That divine compassion extended even to enemies? That the Creator cared for all creation? The silence leaves us to wonder, to examine our own hearts and ask if we, like Jonah, ever begrudge the grace given to others, ever wish to limit the reach of divine love, ever think we know better than God who deserves redemption and who doesn't.